How are you doing?
If you
How are you
don't,
doing?
then fine.
Modify the Chase put you on? Did Chase put you on?
No, I just did this morning.
Alright, we do the same thing, like put everything in one cell.
Yeah, I have a.
Be great.
I have a PDF macro, so I can just draw lines and
project.
just go ahead and do
So,
that. And the PDF though.
But you
Ground
can use the
leases.
lines and then like choose where the cells are.
I just, yeah, I can draw a line.
what do you want
I
to
thought
know?
you could do it.
What is it?
You didn't
My
have
company is for Acrobat Pro, so the company pays for it, and you can modify it to PDFs.
So,
You guys finished already?
ground leases are not a new thing. Been around for literally hundreds of, potentially not thousands of years. The whole concept behind a ground lease is the owner of the property doesn't want to relinquish ownership for whatever reason, okay? It may be that it's, you know, a government entity or an educational institution or a family or a tribe or a cult or whatever that owns this piece of land that they don't want to relinquish ownership on, all right? And it may be because they think that there's a lot of hidden value maybe in the land long term. Maybe it's because they want to keep, you know, all the land they currently have contiguously held together long term. But yet there's something they're wanting to achieve. And usually what they're wanting to achieve is some sort of cash flow off of that land. All right, and so it's a question of how do they go about setting it up? Why do they set it up the way that they set it up? What is really the value of the land? What is the value of whatever improvements are put on the land? What are some of the issues that arise in the financing of properties that are on ground leases? So those would be kind of the different things you want to sort of talk a little bit about. So at its most basic level, as I said, it's usually a situation where you have somebody that has land. And like you take a university as an example, all right? Let's say that they want to build new dorms, they want to build a new parking garage, they want to build potentially a new stadium, they want to build, you know, a bunch of different things maybe on land that they own. And this is especially true not only with private universities but also with public universities. But they say, you know, I really don't want as an institution to sell off that big plot of land over there used for the parking garage, or that big parcel of land used for a dorm, or, you know, whatever it might be, because 15, 20, 30 years from now, you know, I may regret, you know, selling that off, because then I've kind of got this hole in the middle of my campus or whatever. So, you know, the idea is to, once again, kind of retain the ownership. But the question is, how can I go about getting that piece of land developed and maybe do so in a way that doesn't really cost me as an institution really any money, but yet generate revenue off of it. And that's usually kind of the foundation of where a lot of the land leases come into perspective. But as I also mentioned, you know, it could be things like tribal lands. I mean, you could have, you know, whether it's like a native or indigenous population that owns land, but yet you have others that want to build on that land, to build whether it's a casino or a housing development, whatever it is, same sort of concept would apply. All right, and also this is maybe another issue. In some cases, some of these entities are precluded from selling the land. Okay, so let's not forget that as well. It may not just be a choice of, okay, we can sell this land, we cannot sell this land. In some cases, they can't. They're actually legally precluded by virtue of whether, once again, internal laws or internal sort of situations, you know, whatever it might be, from, you know, relinquishing ownership. Okay, so how does it work? And how do you come up with, you know, kind of the value for, you know, what this ground lease, you know, might be, and kind of looking at it in tandem with basically the building value? So we can approach it several different ways, but, you know, one of the most fundamental is to basically say, all right, for this piece of dirt, we can charge so many dollars per year. So let's just say $100,000 a year is what we can charge for this ground lease. And most ground leases are going to have a term, okay? Most of them aren't going to be perpetual. Most of them typically time out at the most of like 99 years, but there are always exceptions to that. I would say the normal one would probably be about 30 years, okay, for a typical ground lease. So let's just say we've got 30 years. All right. And one of the other things that we might want to consider is, well, all right, what sort of a rate of return might we, as the owner of the land, or what sort of return are we willing to give to the owner of the land in form of kind of just a simple interest rate, rate of return. So let's just say that, I don't know, 5%, all right? 5% rate of return or discount rate. Now we've got a couple of different ways that we can sort of deal with this valuation, all right? One is to simply, and once again, none of this is new, okay? This is, in essence, just kind of rehash of other stuff we've already done in terms of the calculations and mechanics. So from that standpoint, you can sort of sit back and take a deep breath because it's really not going to be that complicated. All right. So one approach is to simply capitalize the value. In other words, to apply a cap rate. And so there, you're just going to use our good friend Irv. All right. And so here, if the income that it generates is $100,000 a year, for the property owner, that's the equivalent of net operating income, because for a ground lease, you really don't have vacancies and collection losses. Well, you maybe have collection losses, but you don't really have vacancies. If you do have a collection loss, you can pretty much repossess the property, okay? So you sort of think about the cash flow statement, potential gross income of $100,000, subtract out vacancy and collection losses, you don't have any. Adding in other income, you probably don't have any. Gives you effective gross income, subtract out operating expenses. Chances are you don't have any because you're probably going to have the tenant pay the property taxes and probably insurance. So you're just going to get mailbox money for the most part, okay? So this $100,000 of sort of net operating income, not to say that it couldn't be structured differently, but normally that's going to be the way that you're going to structure it. And so we would apply our cap rate of 5%, which would then mean you take the 100,000 divided by 5%, and that means the underlying value of the land would be $2 million, okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Now, this is where, it kind of begins to be, somewhat interesting, I guess, in terms of, all right, yeah, that's the value of the land. And whenever you go to let's say, do a development, in some cases, it's kind of an interesting parallel, or at least I tend to think it is, that in many cases, a typical loan, as we've sort of typical, is an 80% loan to value ratio, which is what we've, talked about many times over. And in a lot of cases, that 20% is usually the land, okay, that you bring into the deal in the sense that you buy the land, you bring the land into the deal, and then ultimately that becomes kind of the contribution the lender is comfortable with in terms of collateral and so forth, so on. And then, the overall value of the property obviously being the 100%, okay? So in this case, if we're sort of backing into this, we're saying if this is the value of the land, then what are we sort of saying the overall implied value of the project as a whole is?
80%. Oh, no.
120.
Yeah.
100, basically 10 million. Because we're saying if this represents 20% of the total, then 100% of the total would be 10 million, and then 8 million would in essence be the 80%, or basically the improvements value. Does that make sense? Okay, it doesn't always work out that way. But the reason I'm sort of doing this is to kind of get you to maybe think about this, because think about it from the lender's perspective. All right, you walk into a lender and you're saying, okay, I want to do this development, and they're saying, okay, what are you bringing to the table? And if you can tell them that you're basically bringing the land to the table in the sense that you either own the land or you control the land, or that you have a partner that owns or controls the land, then that becomes the sort of the equity contribution into the project. Does that make sense? Now, the interesting thing about this is, but the lender is saying, well, wait a second. Yeah, you're bringing the land into this deal, but this is a ground lease, okay? You don't actually own the land. Now, your partner, who actually maybe owns the land, if you choose to have them as a partner, and it's probably to your benefit to have them as your partner, okay, because they do own the land, but that's their sort of contribution into the deal as a whole, then, you know, from that perspective, then the lender is going to be probably a lot more open to doing whatever sort of deal with you, because they're saying, okay, your partner is the landowner, they own the land free and clear, even though you're going to be making lease payments to them, that's going to be okay. But what they're probably going to want you to do, almost exclusively, is to, keyword here, subordinate their position to basically the primary loan, okay? So in other words, if you're the landowner, all right, and I'm the developer, you're going to be doing this ground lease with me, but you're also, you know, my partner in this deal, then the lender, you know, is going to say to us, all right, that's fine, but I want, as a lender, the opportunity to be able to go after that land in the event that this project blows up, okay? And so the way that they're able to do that is if the landowner is willing to subordinate or allow themselves to sort of be put in a vulnerable position that if the development does blow up, that potentially the lender can take over control of the land, or certainly demand damages equivalent to basically the value of the land. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, the key word there is that the landowner would have to subordinate their position to the primary lender, okay, or the mortgage. Okay, make sense? Yes or no? Any questions about that? Okay, now, so this is obviously one way to sort of get at, well, what is the value of the land? Okay, we get at this $2 million. Now, another way to sort of approach this, a little bit maybe more sophisticated, would be maybe you have a situation of where you have a ground lease that stair steps, meaning that the dollar amount of the actual ground lease payment changes during the term of the lease itself. Okay, because in that assumption, or this model, what are we basically assuming? That $100,000 that we're basically paying for that ground lease stays constant forever and ever and ever, or at least for that 30-year period. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Mm-hmm. Okay? But chances are, the owner of the land may say, you know, a lot can happen in 30 years, and chances are the value of my land is going to go up over time, so why should I be stuck with only receiving, you know, that base level payment of $100,000 for the next 30 years? Why don't I basically put some sort of way to benefit from a value appreciation associated with that land over time? So the most probably involved, complex that, you know, you could probably envision would be, all right, you know, every year, whenever, and in most cases, this is also sort of interesting. Once again, there are always exceptions, but in most cases, most ground leases are annual, okay? But there is an annual payment that you sort of make for that land instead of it being a monthly payment. Now, I'm not saying it can't be a monthly payment, but in many cases it is an annual payment. Okay, but having just said that, kind of the most extreme would be for the landowner to say, all right, every year we're going to revalue the land. We're going to say, all right, what has happened, over this past year? Has land value within this particular area gone up by 5%, gone down by 5%, stayed the same? And it's sort of like a variable rate mortgage, okay, or just a rate mortgage. Same sort of thing with the ground lease. It's just a question of how often it adjusts. Does it adjust like each year? Does it have a cap on the amount or percentage that it can adjust from one year to the next, or the amount that it can go down, a floor? Because what happens if the whole market falls apart? Virtually every property in the market is in foreclosure, and so as a result, the value of the land has become almost worthless. So in one sense, you could say, well, the ground lease has become worthless, but chances are the owner of the property doesn't want to open themselves up to that level, so they may want to set some sort of a foundation or ground for how low it can go. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so in our example, let's just say maybe every 10 years we adjust. So years 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 30, we're going to have basically either a different dollar amount or a percentage change, that will take place. So that maybe, in this first 10 years, it stays at $100,000. Okay? But then at the end of 10 years, we can either sort of say it's going to be a fixed percentage increase or a fixed dollar increase, or we could say there's not necessarily going to be an increase, it's just going to be whatever maybe has happened in terms of land values over that time. Has maybe some other independent index changed over time, like, whatever, maybe like the federal funds rate, or maybe a consumer price index, or something else that we would want to tie this to. But let's just say that for years 11 through 20, that it just spikes up to maybe $110,000. Okay? Yep.
What is it usually tied to? Like
once again,
inflation?
there's no absolute as what it has to be tied to. It's just a business deal. And whatever you're willing to accept, whatever I'm willing to accept, whatever we think makes the most sense between us in terms of the deal. I mean, but I would argue that probably in most cases, yeah, it can probably be tied to inflation or some other sort of measure of inflation. Okay, but not necessarily. Okay. They could just simply say, once again, you as the property owner are just simply thinking, okay, 10 years from now, $10,000 increase a year seems reasonable to me. So it may not be anything other than that's what you want to do. Okay?
Is that the annual income or the value?
That would be the annual income or the annual payment for the ground lease. Okay? And then maybe in the following 10 years, doesn't go up quite as much. Let's say it goes up to $115,000 a year. All right? Now, in terms of finding the value of this land, all right, part of what we might also want to do is to say, well, maybe at the end of this 30 years, we're also assuming kind of that it has a residual value or a terminal value of, let's just say 1.2 million. All right. Now, if we wanted to essentially find what the value is of this land and of this potential sort of lease arrangement, what we would do is basically just a simple discounted cash flow. All right, so we're going to have to use basically the payment function, well, not the payment function, the cash flow function on the calculator, but we've got to know what our discount rate is that we're going to use. So let's just say, give me a discount rate.
3.5.
3.5%, okay. All right, so we'll find the value of this ground lease. Okay, see if you can figure it out on your own real quick. This is nothing new. Okay, once again, you should be able to figure this out using the cash flow function. First person to figure it out, let me know. that's what you're figuring out.
Oh, shit.
Okay, everybody got it?
Let's see.
Okay, that's what it looks like in terms of the cash flows. Assuming 3.5% discount rate. That helps you out a little bit.
Can I ask a question? Is it the NPV function?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I don't know what I was doing, you know, thinking IRR.
Yeah.
Oh, what?
Okay, anybody want to hazard a guess?
I could guess 2,960,000.
6.9 million?
No,
1.9?
no. At least if I did it correctly, which I'm hoping I did, 2.38 million.
Oh, but for, what's
So you're
that,
good, you're
zero?
just only overpaid by like
So you only
700
did,
grand.
9 years for.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's not a lot of money. Oh, that's not a lot.
That,
Okay, so here's what I did.
That's what I did.
Let's just double check, make sure. All right, so what I did, one payment per year. Okay. Then you're gonna do 0 as your initial cash flow. Yeah. Remember, that's time period 0, so we gotta do that as your initial cash flow. You should know this by now, come on.
You knew we were.
All right, 100,000
Oh, so I already got it wrong.
as a cash flow. That's gonna be for 10 years, so 10 shift in sub J. Okay.
So you don't do that, so I guess it's
9
not.
subject?
Yeah, exactly. Isn't it 9 subject?
No, not if you're, because the final one will be,
Yeah, it's fine.
Wow.
follow me.
You still get-
Give me a
Well,
second.
before we follow you.
Don't trust me on this.
No, I trust you, but I mean like,
Okay.
so is that
Okay,
100,000
year one,
CFJ
okay,
not
year-
year
okay,
one?
Year 1,
Okay.
year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10. That is 10.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the
But this
10,
is-
100,000, so
Correct.
then when you do the end subject, wouldn't it be 9 more or no?
No, it's including that first one.
Okay, see, that's what, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
In
not putting
other words,
11,
what
it's
it's
not
saying,
putting 100 grand in 10 more.
what it's saying is put that 100,000 in
Oh,
10 times.
Gotcha.
okay.
Okay?
We're learning.
It'd be a painful process.
It is a painful process. I'm willing to ask the questions.
There ain't no solution.
Hey, somebody's gotta do it.
Exactly.
Now, for the last 10 years, this is then when you would put it in for 9, because your final cash flow is going to be the 115,000 plus the reversion of the 1.2 million. Then you're going to put in the 3.5% discount rate, and then solve for net present value for the year. And what I got was $2,388,391.25 rounded. Okay, so double check it, triple check it. Everybody matching up with me? Have you tried? Just trusting me.
Trusting you.
Trust no one.
I'm still
Trust but
getting,
verify.
I'm still getting no solution.
So just for fun, let's just sort of take each of these just to kind of just see. So 100,000, obviously, times 10, that's 1 million. Oops. $100 times 10 would be 1.1 million. And then 115 times 9 would be 1 million, oops, 35,000. And then the final one, this would be 1,315,000. So the total for all of these would be $4,450,000 of total actual income, but because you're receiving it over 30 freaking years, you know, it's really only worth $2.3 million to you today. Okay? Make sense?
What did you just do?
Probably something I shouldn't have done if it confuses you. Okay? But all I did was to simply say, all right, how much total actual revenue would be receiving off of this in hard cash dollars, ignoring the time value of money. So just simply saying, $100,000 times 10 would be $1 million. $110,000 times 10 would be $1.1 million. $115,000 times 9 years would be $1,035,000. And then for that final year, $115,000 plus $1.2 million would be $1,315,000. Add all of those up, and you get $4,450,000. But what we're saying is because of discounting this thing by 3.5% over 30 years, it's really only worth $2.3 million to us today. In other words, think of it like this. It's like that, you know, the commercials on the TV that talk about, you know, you got structured settlements, or you got payouts over time. Well, in this case, we're saying, all right, yeah, if we were to trade off and say, all right, we'll, you know, give you this amount in cash today, or you can wait for the next 30 years to collect this total dollar amount, which would you prefer? Well, at the 3.5%, you would be theoretically indifferent between the two because technically it would be the same. But the reality is in terms of raw cash, yeah, you're getting more here, but if we're actually sort of applying the discount rate to say what was it really worth to us in today's dollars, it's this, okay? All right, questions? Yep.
Okay, so if we just figured out what the property is worth.
Yep, that's
Okay,
this.
Right, so then back to loan to value, if the bank is saying you're bringing that much to the
If we're saying
value
this,
of the whole project?
yep, if we're saying that this is the land value, and the lender is willing to lend you, they're basically saying that this is maybe worth 20% of the overall value of the property. And then if we were to take that number, 2388, 391, 25, and divide by 0.8, or sorry, 5 by 0.2. Then that means the overall project value would be like 11, would be like 11,941,956.25 would be like the overall sort of project value.
So if the banks bring in their 80 to make that, they're really paying for the whole cost. If
Well,
they
the
are-
80 would then be 80% of this.
Then you still have to come up with the other 20% of that.
Well, that's the land value.
So what I'm saying is that the bank's really gonna cover the rest of the expense. If you inherited the land, and you had it, and you say, I'm bringing this to it, they're really paying for the whole project.
Correct.
In that case.
Correct.
If you don't have another.
Because they're saying they're willing to use the land as collateral. Because they're saying, worst case scenario, you start building on the property and something goes wrong or you're not able to do whatever, then we can just take possession of the land and whatever you've done up to that point, we can sell it off, hopefully recoup whatever we have in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but in a way, they're kind of paying for the whole
Yeah, well, they are
project if
funding.
you already have the land.
Well, yeah, in terms of the improvements, yes. Because in essence, they're really giving you a construction loan.
Right, for the whole
Right.
construction.
Right.
Okay.
Okay? Because as long as they've got collateral, they don't really care to a certain extent even where it comes from. I mean, as long as it's something, I mean, yeah, they prefer cash as collateral, but I mean, you know, barring that, the land is, you know, the next more perfect, you know, form of collateral for the deal. Unless you have worthless land. Which is entirely possible.
Brownfield.
Yeah, you've got some sort of environmentally contaminated land, or you've got some land in a wetland, you've got some sort of land in a, you know, just some other weird, well, in an area that doesn't have any sort of economic base, you know, whatever it might be. But assuming that the land is located in an area that fits the development and the rents that you would be able to charge for the development or the income that you'd be able to generate from it, then hopefully it makes sense.
But this is just one scenario, so it could be
Right.
that they say, okay, your land doesn't.
Like, I mean, just, okay, here would be like one example of where probably the lender would not be willing to take the land value. Let's just say, I don't know, I'm just gonna throw something out there. Let's say that you have an area of a county or community that you know is potentially, it's in the growth pattern, and then somebody goes in there at the very beginning to build a shopping center or build a church or build something else before really all of the rooftops are there to really support that particular thing. At that point, that land is probably not valued very high, okay? Therefore, the lender's probably not going to lend you very much, okay? Now, once everything is sort of there, then hopefully that land has increased in value substantially enough to be able to then be a meaningful contribution to the overall value of the property. But, you know, sort of the assumption that we're making here is this land is in a normal area, normal patterns of development, you know, it just happens to be a vacant parcel of land or an available parcel of land to be able to develop on. Even though it's tied to a ground lease, it's still, you know, an opportunity for development. And see, this is, you know, another thing that, you know, in terms of motivations and that sort of thing, that you may have like once again, sort of like families being another one of the categories that do these long-term ground leases. It may be that your grandfather owned a ranch or a farm or whatever it may be, but then stipulated in their will that as long as you own and operate, you know, this farm and ranch and you don't sell off any of the land, it's yours in perpetuity, you know, into the family. So they're restricted in that they can't, you know, basically sell off the land, so they're forced into maybe doing a ground lease if they ever want to see that property develop beyond where it currently is. Does that make sense? All right. Okay. Other questions?
You can lock a property like that in a will?
Yes,
saying
you
that
can.
You can't sell.
Because once again, I'm not your real estate attorney. I mean, in the real estate law class that Weissman teaches, hopefully he covers some of this, but basically it's the whole thing of being able to say in a will that you want to preclude somebody from being able to use that property for some other use, or be able to sell off that property for some particular use, you know, and so you're putting restrictions on the future, and if you abandon some aspect of that, basically that will, then the property can potentially then revert back to maybe the estate or be sold off, or in some, you know, like for example, it's quite common that you'll have people donate land for maybe some sort of public use. I mean, one of the most popular for many, many years, you know, back in probably like the early 1900s to let's say the 1950s, was to donate land for a public library. And to say, hey, we're gonna, you know, our family is gonna donate, you know, this piece of land, and as long as it's used for a public library, the city government gets to keep that land, you know, indefinitely, doesn't have to pay us rent, you know, it's theirs. But the moment that it stops being used as a public library, then the ownership of that land reverts back to maybe the estate of the original, you know, property owner. So I mean, it's all these kinds of restrictions that, unless it's something illegal, you know, that it's sort of saying, okay, yeah, you're gonna use this, or you must use this property as a casino, but yet it's not legally permissible for it to be used as a casino, then, you know, you may have a problem. But for the most part, whenever, you know, it's the same sort of, I guess, restriction that a developer can place on a subdivision. That they can sort of say, okay, here are the guidelines for the future development of this subdivision and the guiding principles of how it will look, how it will be maintained, you know, the homeowners association, all that sort of thing. You know, all of that sort of set up in the, so it's like the previous landowner can, in essence, subjugate you to all of these restrictions. Now, you have to accept them, you know, typically whenever you buy the land, or if you inherit it, you really don't have much choice. But, you know, but there can be all sorts of restrictions on what you can and can't do with that property, is my point. Make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, that's how Trump bought Mar-a-Lago, because Meriwether Post donated the estate to be the Winter White House, and then Carter or somebody said we can't afford to keep it anymore, and then gave it back to the estate, and then Trump kept going back until he got it for like.
Interesting. I did not know that. Okay, all right. Any other questions on this piece? Okay, moving forward. All right. So this has sort of looked at the land value, all right? What if we want to look at probably the residual value of the actual building or improvements, all right? How would we approach that? So there, what we would typically do is we would need to know the net operating income off the property. We would want to know what the ground lease payment is. Okay. And then the cash flow left over from that. And then going to apply a similar sort of methodology. So for example, let's say that we have a property that's generating $250,000 a year. Now this is the property as a whole. This is, so the NOI for the building plus the land, okay? So we're looking at it a little bit differently here, all right? So the building and the land, the NOI that is being generated off of whatever income the property is producing is $250,000. And then of that, let's say $100,000 is the ground lease. So here we have this $150,000 of cash flow that's sort of left over. that is in essence attributed to the building or the improvements. Does that make sense? In other words, the property is generating income. The total income that's generating after expenses for the building and the land is $250,000, but then we say, okay, we've got to pay the landowner their due in terms of the ground lease. So how much money is left over that we can really just then attribute to just the improvements, just the physical bricks and sticks on the land? Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay, it's the
This is
first
annually, right?
I'm sorry?
Annually?
Yes. So now, what we would do, just like in the sort of previous example, is we'd say, okay, here we're looking at trying to find the building value, all right? So we would apply a cap rate, so give me a cap rate.
7%.
7%, all right? So in this case, divide that by a 7% cap rate. And you're going to get okay, that would then be the building value. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, once again, that's what, let's say, we're searching for, but we could also just sort of say, all right, if we want to back into it, well, what's our land value? If we use the same cap rate, the land value would be the 100,000 divided by 7%, or 1,428,571.43, and the total value would be the 250,000 divided by 7%. Okay, does that make sense?
For the land, you just did 100,000 divided by.
Correct. Okay, make sense? Now, this is where it gets a bit more interesting, kind of philosophical about, kind of looking at this. Should the cap rate for the building be the same as for the land?
No.
Not necessarily. Okay? Because one could make the argument there's a lot less risk associated with the land, okay? So we probably maybe shouldn't have as high of a cap rate for the land as maybe we do for the building or the use of the land by virtue of what's being built on it. But it's also kind of difficult to separate it out, to really say, well, this is the appropriate cap rate or that sort of thing. And so most of the time it just sort of gets lumped in together and they sort of say, okay, we're going to apply the same cap rate to both. But fundamentally or philosophically, you might want to make the argument that you could probably have a much lower cap rate for the land value, which is going to inherently do what? Inflate the value of the land that much more. Okay? All right, make sense?
So if it inflates the value of the land, it would be, from a buying standpoint, if I was the buyer, yeah, I would want to lump them together. And
Correct.
if I was a seller, I would want to separate them apart.
In that sense, yes. Under those circumstances and that logic, yes.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right. So far, so good. Yep.
So essentially, let's say you're selling a piece of land with real estate built on top of it, would it be smart from a seller standpoint to go ahead and separate the two and
It could. Okay, and it's an excellent question because what if, and this sort of gets back to something that we talked a little bit about last week, but what if the land is ridiculously valuable, but what's built on top of it, not so much, okay? Then it's limiting the use of the land, okay? But you have a prime piece of real estate with a crappy little shopping center built on it, or some sort of little, I mean, probably even an easier example to relate to. let's just go to the beach, okay? You go to Fort Lauderdale Beach or any other beach. Around the beach, there are a number of still existing, probably built in the 1940s and 50s, little crappy two-story sort of beach homes or condos or townhomes or whatever word you want to use, and they're immediately adjacent to a 40, 50 story luxury, whatever. But for whatever reason, it could be that once again you're not able to maybe build anything that dense on that property, or it could be that the owner of the property just simply doesn't want to sell, or the collection of owners, if it's a multi sort of tenanted condo or townhome, doesn't want to sell. But yet, one would have to argue that the value of that land is outrageous, and if you just were to scrape the land clean, the value of the improvements is almost nothing. Okay, so in that sense, yeah, you sort of could say, value of the property kind of overall is this, but 90% of the value is actually the land, not really, what's really on the land, because of that full production value of the property if it were put into full use. Okay, its highest and best use. Okay, all right, good question. All right, move on. So, kind of like the previous one, so let's just say that we've got an NOI, ground lease, and we've got years 1 to 10 and maybe years 11 to 20 for this ground lease and the property. And let's say that the net operating income of the property is, I don't know, $300,000 a year for the first 10 years, and then maybe it goes up to $350,000 for the next 10 years, and then the ground lease maybe starts out at $100,000, but then goes up to maybe $125,000. Okay, so in terms of your sort of leftover cash flow, here you'd be dealing with $200,000 of leftover cash flow, and then there, obviously 350 minus 125, 225,000 leftover cash flow, all right, for the second 10 years. And let's say that at the end of that term, sort of the terminal value is, let's just say 2 million. Right? Okay. So much like the previous example, you're going to put that in. Now, what sort of discount rate or cap rate we want to use?
8%.
Okay, 8%. So a discount rate of 8%. Okay, so see if you can solve this one. All right.
What are we solving?
Just like last time, you're solving for what is the value of, in this case, it would be the building portion of the value.
2470, 42.
Okay, let's find out.
I'm guessing, I don't remember.
Okay, so 1 payment per year. 0 is our initial cash flow. 200,000 as a cash flow for 10 years. 225,000 as a cash flow for 9 years. And then 225,000, no, 2,225,000 as the final cash flow. And the discount rate we're using is 8%. Solve for net present value. Okay, so let's see what we get. One more time. Oop, nope. This looks way too low.
Yeah, I got 24 now. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2,470,000, 427.55 would then be the value of what? Be careful before you answer.
The building,
The building value.
not the land.
Correct.
He X'd out the land already.
Okay. Now, if we wanted to find the value of the land by itself, we would do basically the same procedure, but pretty much.
Just the ground lease.
But the problem with that is we would also then have to separate out some of the terminal value. Okay. So this approach is just giving us what the value of the land is. Just the land. Building. I got it right here in front of me. Building. Okay.
So that doesn't have to be separated out with the terminal value?
Because here we're assuming that it's being sold, the actual building itself is being sold off.
Okay, but we're still keeping things.
Right.
How are you who's the property owner in this situation? You're saying NOI is 300, but then you're saying less the ground lease, so it's like an operator who has a ground lease with someone? Is that essentially?
Yeah, I mean, okay, and we can kind of get into this a little bit later, but once again, kind of going back to the scenario that if you're the person who owns the land, I'm, let's say, the developer who builds the building, all right, I'm going to be making ground lease payments to you, all right? Now the question is, under this scenario, the way that we're working it is, you're simply, all you're getting out of this development deal, you as the owner of the land, you're getting the $100,000 for the next 10 years, and then $125,000 for every year after that for the next 10 years, okay? I, on the other hand, as the developer of the property, am getting, in essence, well, the remaining cash flow off of the property after I have paid you, after I, have paid whatever other debt and that sort of thing that I have associated with the property. So this would be the cash flow that I'm getting. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So based on what we just did, this is just selling the building, not the land.
In essence, yes. Or what is the residual value of the land? And the question is who gets that? And that's a whole other thing in the sense of, in some instances of ground leases that are not renewable, like after this 20 years, assuming it's not renewable, it's possible that that full $2 million reversion could go to the landowner. But it also could be that at the end of this 20-year term, he is obligated to renew the ground lease for me. And this is why it's so important up front to spell out what those terms of that ground lease are, that, you know, one would hope that it's a perpetual sort of ground lease, that as long as you agree to the conditions of, you know, whatever it might be, that you don't end up in a situation of where you're having to give back basically whatever improvements you've done to the property. Now, it is quite common, and we were talking a little bit about last week, that, you know, you build a residence hall, you build a, you know, parking garage, you build whatever, and the idea would be you as the operator get to keep any and all cash flow that generates for the full 20 years, and then at the end of the 20 years, you're forced to give it, you know, give away the actual ownership of the physical bricks and sticks to the actual landowner. So it's just a question of how you set it up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, moving forward. Okay, that gets us through the ground lease stuff. All right, so it moves us into basically the item number 6, equity participation loans. Okay, we want to take a break or are we good? Yep.
I wanted to, you mentioned something about separating the discount rate from the
Yep.
ground to the building. How do you do that?
Very carefully. No, but the honest answer is it's an issue that can be somewhat subjective, because what you're trying to do is, yeah, you're trying to figure out, well, how much of this really is land value, how much of this is really building value, okay? And it's not an absolute precise science, okay? And so in a lot of cases, what you're probably going to try to do is kind of like we did last week in talking about, you know, the sort of comparable sales and that sort of thing. You're going to try to look for, you know, what are values of land on a per square foot basis within, you know, the same market area, to try to get some sort of a sense for what that underlying value is, and then apply what you think would then be an appropriate, you know, rate of return for, because it's going to be somewhat unique to that individual. You know, what I choose to accept as an acceptable rate of return as, let's say, a university may not be the same as I'm willing to accept as a government institution, which may not be the same that I would be willing to accept as a religious institution, which may not be the same as I would be willing to accept as an indigenous tribe, you know, so forth, so on. So it's not an absolute, is what I'm saying. But in terms of how you come up with what the appropriate, you know, one is, it's going to be still a judgment call. I mean, I know I'm not giving you probably the answer that you want, which is you're going to absolutely use this and that, but the only thing you really can do is to look at what similar properties that have sold within that market and try to back into what would be an appropriate, you know, value for it.
And then also I was going to ask, can you use this methodology to assess air rights and its value?
It's a little bit different. I mean, and that usually whenever okay, I have never seen air rights leased. I have only seen air rights sold.
Correct.
Much the same way. And even with mineral rights, you can lease or you can sell them. You have that sort of option. I'm not saying that you don't have the option of leasing air rights. I've just never seen them leased. I mean, I suppose
but
you
you
can.
can still find a value for it.
Yeah, you still find a value for it. I mean, depending on what it, you know, but it's got to be value to who. And if it's, you know, value in the sense of you know, letting somebody build on top of your structure, like for example, you've got a one-story building on this parcel of land, and in essence they want to build a skyscraper that literally is on top of your one-story building, which I've seen, you know, weird situations like that. Then, you know, that's a possibility that, you know, you would want to carve out and say, well, what is the real value of those air rights? Much the same as we were sort of saying earlier, that yeah, if you've got this clunky little one-story structure that's really, you know, underutilizing the property, but yet you don't want to tear it down, or maybe you can't tear it down, or whatever, then yeah, you can sell the air rights. You know, what is that ultimate incremental value? So yeah, it's doable.
So the incremental value is coming from the potential project that you can build.
Right. Yes.
Assessing the space that you can get from the air rights.
Yes. In other words, how much additional value would be created by the project that is being built on top of you as it relates to, you know, in essence, it's equivalent in one sense to kind of like it's a partial ground lease. Or it's not really a ground lease, I mean, it is air rights, but yet it's same principle, yes.
Yeah, it's just value.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay?
Can you show the bottom of part of the screen again?
So that's building capitalization.
Yes. Okay, moving forward.
Can you buy some beer? Did I buy some beer? What? Just after party?
The previous one to the one we just did, that's,
You have to do
is
that.
that building NOI discounted cash flow?
Come to quarter deck,
DCF?
Yeah,
It is?
yeah. Trust me, I covered all five. Not necessarily the order in which they were on.
Yeah,
the
I
way
just wanted
you
to make
like-
sure that.
Yes,
Correct.
okay.
105. Correct. Good to hear.
I basically did 2, 1, 5, 4, 3.
2, 1.
All right, moving forward.
We're halfway done.
Yes. But that was the easy stuff.
It's also interesting.
Okay.
I read
you
you
get a
5, I
grade
only have
overall?
4 columns.
In the class? Next.
I've only done 4.
Okay, anybody have any idea what an equity participation loan is?
No, sir.
No one wants to take a stab at what it might be?
I got a project, I'm looking for equity investors. Instead of equity, I'm taking out a loan against them. I tried.
You try.
You did try, Ken.
You try. Okay. An equity participation loan is, for the most part, where your lender participates in the upside or the equity of the project. Now, this is different. You remember one of the types of loans that we did was, that kind of got to some of this, was like a plan, a price level adjusted mortgage. Remember that, yes? Okay, this is a little bit different in the sense that we have our loan with our lender, but then our lender simply wants a piece of the action with respect to whatever cash flow the property is generating and what that cash flow is over time. Does that make sense? Okay? So, all right, let's say that we've got $1 million property.
And that's aside from like the debt service, right?
Yeah, and we're gonna explain how it all integrates. Okay, so, and now we're gonna be back to 12 payments per year, just in case you were wondering. All right, so $1 million is gonna be our loan amount. All right, give me an interest rate. Something really low on purpose.
3,
Lower.
1.
2 1/4.
2. Okay, 2% interest rate. All right, and then a term, let's say 15 years. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're just simply gonna calculate the payment. All right, so let's do that first. $64.35, 09. Okay, everybody get that?
Yep.
All right. So that is gonna be our monthly payment. Now, in this case, let's say that the net operating income on the property is, on an annual basis, once again, annual, net operating income is gonna be let's say $150,000, be safe. $150,000, okay? So, in this case, our annual debt service is gonna be what? $64,3509 times
7722,104.
Okay, so let's subtract that out. That leaves us with $72,778.96 as our before tax cash flow. Everybody with me? Anybody not with me? Okay.
How'd you get things up?
Okay. All right.
Pass that around.
All right. So let's say that the deal that we make with the lender is we're going to give them a percentage of the annual net operating income, and we could structure it a variety of different ways. We could say, all right, we're going to give you 25% above $50,000 of net operating income. Does that make sense? All right. So let's just say that that's the deal that we strike with this lender. We're going to give you 25% of net operating income above $50,000. Okay, that would be a typical deal. You're not giving them 25% of net operating income. You're giving them 25% of net operating income that's above $50,000.
So the 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
So just like conceptually understand this, if I were to give somebody an equity participation loan, that's like, hey, I'm doing a project, I want this money from you. Obviously, you know, it might be your friends and family, like high net worth individual giving you money, and then you go, okay, but I still need to make some money on the bone, or like some meat on the bone, so I'm gonna say $50,000 is what I'm hoping to make on the whole project if it's successful. I won't pay myself a dime before that, but then if I make anything over, we'll share in the proceeds.
To a certain extent.
Okay.
Okay. So let me set up slightly different. Okay.
All right.
So I'm the lender, high net worth individual, whatever. All right. So I loan you this $1 million at 2%, and I purposely said a low interest rate. Okay. And the reason for that low interest rate is I'm sort of saying to myself, if I'm not giving you this money to do this deal, it's just going to be parked in a CD, you know, some sort of just interest-bearing, you know, account earning almost nothing. All right. So I want to get paid that as an absolute minimum, so that it's no different than, in essence, what I'm getting from my, you know, from investing that money somewhere else. Okay. Because normally in this sort of a type of loan, we're not talking about your traditional lender in the sense of Wells Fargo, Bank of America. We're talking about typically a high net worth individual or some sort of syndicate or joint venture, whatever, you know, word you want to attach to it. And so they're just simply saying, okay, yeah, we want to, you know, get our 2% for the 15 years, but we want a piece of the action. We believe in the project. We think it's going to be successful, but we don't want to put an undue burden on you with just a fixed interest rate. Instead, we want to participate in the upside of the project so that we both mutually are going to have
An incentive
for the project to be successful, both lender and borrower. Okay, So what's gonna happen is, okay, this project generates $150,000 of annual net operating income. We obviously have to pay back, you know, the lender, the debt service, okay? But of the actual NOI, we also have to pay them 25% of that NOI that's above $50,000, okay? So as Kenny pointed out, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we have $150,000 of NOI, and we've got to subtract out 50,000 of that, which leaves us with 100,000 that we then have to pay 25% of, which means we've got to pay them an extra $25,000 a year,
That'll
okay,
put you also.
as their equity sort of participation payment.
But it's not equity, it's like,
It's equity in the sense that you are building equity in the project over time, and this is simply, instead of you getting a traditional return on equity, this is providing the lender a return on equity of sorts.
if you were doing this for a company, would you be selling your equity or would you be selling per like
You're
whatever?
not
you're
actually
doing?
selling, okay, let me sort of get a little further along in the example, and I think it maybe will make more sense. Okay? All right, but you understand the mechanics of what's happening? Yes? Okay. Now, so in addition to, this is where I think it'll all make sense. So in addition to getting that $25,000 a year of sort of extra payment, you also get to participate in the sale or reversion price of the property, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so at the end of, let's say, 5 years, at the end of year 5, the lender receives 10% of sale price beyond purchase price minus mortgage balance. Would be one way to structure it. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so in this particular case, let's say that this was a $1 million loan or debt, and the equity was $200,000, meaning $1.2 million total for the purchase price of the property, okay? And the property has maybe increased in value by, give me a percentage over time, like 20% over time? Okay, so it's increased by 20% price appreciation. All right. Which would mean it's now worth $1,440,000. Okay? Are we good with that? All right. Now, let's say that we're going to sell this property at the end of year 5. Okay, and this is the value also at end of year 5. Okay? So, let's figure out how all these pieces fit together. Okay? Exactly.
Did you just,
All right.
did you just make up that 1 million debt?
No, that was the original loan that he restructured for the
okay.
payment.
Alright, can you,
Okay,
It's like
so let's take a look at what's happening here. Now we have two timelines, because one is going to be from the lender, one is going to be from the borrower. Okay? All right. So at time period 0, the lender is releasing $1 million. Yes? Okay? The borrower, at time period 0, is releasing how much? 200,000. Okay? Now, so each year, the lender is receiving how much?
why is the borrower releasing 200 grand?
That's our,
Equity.
That's
what you put down.
that's our down payment. Right here.
Yep. So I was missing.
Okay?
The lenders, that's.
All right, so the lender is receiving debt service
You can put that anywhere.
of $77,221.04.
4,325.
Is receiving the debt service of 77 of 77,221.04 plus their equity participation, which is going to be 25,000. Okay? And they're going to, in essence, be receiving that for 5 years. Okay? So let's just go ahead and do the total. So we've got that. So the total would be 102,221.04, 102,221.04, 102,221.04, 102,221.04, and 102,221.04, okay? For that piece of it, okay? Then, at the time of sale, okay, we need to figure out what their loan balance is, okay? So the loan balance on this, okay, so we go back to our $1 million loan.
Can you put pre-appreciation?
I'm sorry, what?
Can you scroll down a little bit? Pre-appreciation, got this.
That's price appreciation. Okay, all right. So we go back up to our original loan. We put in the $1 million as our present value, 2% is the interest rate, 15 years is the term, solve for the payment. We get, once again, get that. Then we need to find the balance at the end of 5 years, because we're going to be basically selling the property at the end of 5 years. So what we're going to do, let me space it, I'll put it over here. All right, so in this case, 1, input, 60, shift, amortize, equal, equal, equal. We get our loan balance. Of $699,363.71. Okay? Yep,
That's building off of the original, right?
original loan.
So,
1 million.
when we did this on our calculator, and we saw that we got that payment function, should we immediately after solving that payment of 6435, just like,
Yeah, if you want to go in, if you want to go ahead and put in the, to find the loan balance, not have to come back to it.
why did you do price appreciation of, 20?
I'm sorry?
So you multiplied it by 1.2?
That's just a price appreciation.
Yeah, it was just random.
We're just simply saying the property is going to increase by 20%, and at the end of this 5-year term, that's how much it's going to be worth. Okay? All right. Now, so if we kind of go back up here to this little statement, at end of year 5, the lender receives 10% of the sale price beyond the purchase price minus the mortgage balance. So, in this case, the property we're saying is going to sell for $1,440,000. Okay? Now we're not taking into account taxes and all that sort of stuff and whatever, depreciation. We're just simply saying, okay, it's sold for that. We subtract out the balance of the loan, which is $699, $363.71, okay? And that gives us $740,000, $636.29, and the lender is going to receive 10% of that. Or $74,063.63. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, so their final cash payment here in year 5 is going to be what? It's going to be the $102,221.04 plus they are going to get back their loan balance of $699,363.71 plus they're going to get that 10% price appreciation of $74,063.63. Exactly. Okay? All right, so we add all those up.
That's bluffing. Loan balance.
L on this question.
Yes.
I can afford it.
This is gonna be one question.
Yes.
It's like six.
I'm gonna get 2, just
We'll get a
next.
copy of
This
it.
could be like.
I wrote this question with you in mind, Andrew.
Really?
Appreciate it.
Okay.
No, price appreciation.
So 875, 648, 38. Okay, with our final cash flow. Okay?
That's your payment.
That would be the amount that the lender would receive in year 5 in total. Okay? Now, so from the lender's perspective, what is their rate of return? Okay? So from the lender's perspective, let me just erase the borrower thing here for a minute. Come back to it. Okay. So from the lender's perspective in this deal, we're going to set this up as one payment per year because we're lumping everything in together at the end of the year to try to simplify it a little bit. Okay? All right. So we've got $1 million as our cash outflow for time period 0. We have 102,221.04 as a cash flow that's going to occur basically year 1, year 2, year 3, and year 4, so 4 times. And then the final cash flow will be for year 5 will be the 875, 648, 38, then you're going to simply, in this case, solve for internal rate of return. Okay? All right, so let's see what we get. Okay? So the lenders basically return 6.22. Now you, as the borrower, thought, from the lender's perspective, that the lender would be only really getting, in one sense, initially when you think about just a loan, they're getting 2% rate of return, but the reality is they're really getting a 6% rate of return. Okay? Makes sense.
That was a lot.
What?
That was a lot.
Yeah, we're not done yet.
Oh,
That's the first half.
I'm done.
Okay, the second half is from the borrower's perspective. Okay? All right? So from the borrower's
The
perspective,
lenders.
Oh, man, that was right.
It must be this
Just
year.
go with just
Right.
Yeah.
What's the plan to get it?
I don't
Okay.
warn us when it's this long, because then like I can account for it on my notes.
Yeah.
what?
You gotta warn us when it's gotta be a lot of writing, so we can make adequate room.
Clear sheet.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you scroll up a little bit?
No.
New page.
Broke your brain yet?
Yes. I never had a brain to begin with.
Whoa.
Hey, you can't break it.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like the Wizard of Oz, like one guy didn't have a heart, one guy didn't have courage. Or is that the same thing?
Well, the Scarecrow was the one that didn't have the brain, right?
Yeah.
You're just a scarecrow.
It's been a long time since that shit
Not about
happened.
that.
Okay. So, let us look at this from the borrower's perspective. Okay, the borrower is, in essence, putting up $200,000 at time period 0. Yes?
Yes.
Now, their income each year is going to be what? Okay, you've got the net operating income of $150,000, but they're not getting to keep that or all of that. They're obviously having to subtract. Well, okay, we can actually start up here to be simpler. You subtract the debt service from that $150,000. That leaves us with $72,778. But we've got to pay the lender how much?
25.
Wow. And they're making more than
Okay, so this is the participation. So that leaves us, as the borrower, with $72,778.96 minus $25,000. $47,778.96. Okay, so that would be our net cash flow from the borrower's perspective each year. Okay, 47,778.
Don't we have to account for the 75% of, like, because we're only giving him 25% over 50. Right?
Yeah, this is what's left over after that. Okay? Now, what else do we receive? At the end of this, there's going to be reversion, yes? Okay? So the reversion, let's go back up to that for a second. So for the lender, or for the borrower's reversion, you sort of take the 1,440,000, okay? We subtract out the balance of the oops, yellow.
Who are you right now? The borrower? She's still in the borrower.
Okay, so with the borrower, once again, we're subtracting out the loan balance. Okay, then we gotta subtract out what we've paid to the lender. And then we get the remainder. Which would be $666,572.66.
That's like the next person.
Yep.
This is the back.
All right.
All right, could we do the borrower's perspective from the top?
Then, well, we're about to, in the sense that we've got to show you what the cash flows are. All right, so now from the borrower's perspective, once again, let's go down to 1 payment per year. So from their perspective, they're putting in $200,000 as the initial cash flow. They are receiving $47,778.96 as a cash flow for 1, 2, 3, 4 years. And then at the end of all of this, they are receiving a total of $714,351.62, which is just these numbers added together. Then solving for basically their cost to borrow. Okay? Realize not such a bad thing to give away what we gave away, because at the end of the day, we end up with a 43.75% rate of return on our little project.
Where did you get 714,000?
You add these two together.
So after all that.
What two? Oh.
Okay.
Can you just go up a little bit?
So, let's say,
Yeah, we're
okay,
missing.
I'll ask, let him in first and then I'll ask a question.
I just wanna know how you, if you go back to the before tax cash flow.
What's this under?
Right, how do you get the 4779?
Yeah, well, I don't.
You're just subtracting out the participation piece of the 25,000 from the before tax cash flow.
Before tax cash flow.
In other words, this 25,000 is this. It's the piece that you're giving to the lender.
So right after you found the payment of $64.35, you plugged it in as the ADS times, you multiplied it by 12.
Correct. Okay. Oh,
And then
done?
714 was,
Your equity return plus your resale value, your residual resale value. That's the 714.
okay, that's what you did down there. Equity returns.
Is there a way to summarize the steps in this?
What's the sign?
No, I mean,
Theoretically,
the simple explanation is this, okay? It's a two-party deal, okay? You've got the lender and you've got the borrower, okay? The lender is saying, I'm giving you a great deal on this loan at a 2% interest rate. But in return for that really nice low interest rate, I simply want a piece of the action. And the piece of the action that I'm getting is 25% of your net operating income above some sort of a baseline, in this case above $50,000. So if I've got $150,000 of net operating income, and I've got to subtract out the base of $50,000, and that leaves me with $100,000 of NOI that I then have to pay to the lender 25% of that, or in this case, $25,000. Okay, so that is the lender's participation in this deal. Okay, so they're getting that each year. Then, at the tail end of the project, when the project is sold, at the end of 5 years, the lender gets their mortgage balance back, which they ordinarily would, and they get to participate in 10% of the equity reversion. And so what they're doing is you're saying, okay, the property sells for $1,440,000, all right, and then out of that we got to subtract out the loan balance of like $699,000. Then you also but they get 10%, obviously, of whatever that is, which works to be the 70-something, $1,000. That gets added to their loan balance. Okay, so now their income stream is simply. So the lender's income stream is simply they disperse $1 million. They get their normal mortgage payment of the $77,000. They get their participation payment of $25,000, thus the $102,000 for each of the years. Then at the end, whenever they sell the property, or where the borrower sells the property, they still get their $102,000 for that year. The lender does, and they get the mortgage payoff, and they get now this participation in the upside of the value of the property going up. All combined is the $875, and then we simply calculate a rate of return for that. Okay, so that's the lender. The borrower, from their perspective, the money that they're putting out is $200,000 up front as their equity. They are getting in residuals off of the before-tax cash flow after you pay the lender their piece of the puzzle. They're getting $47,000 a year. Then at the end, they get whatever is left over after the mortgage balance has been paid, after the lender has given their final participation payment. That is their remaining amount. Then we simply calculate a rate of return for the borrower. So from the borrower's perspective, they are getting a 43% rate of return on this investment, but they're, in one sense, their effective cost of borrowing, or the lender's yield, is the 6.22%. Okay? Make sense? Very straightforward. Get it?
I got it. But in this situation, or in a situation like this, wouldn't it be prudent to isolate your rate of returns like cash flow and reversion? Because you're paying out two different interest rates.
You are, but in this case, it's also part of just simply how this typical kind of deal structure works. That usually that lender or that person participating in the deal, wants a little bit of piece of the action of the operating cash flow, and they want a little bit of piece of the action in the reversion.
Yeah, but I mean,
you could separate it out. Yes, absolutely. And in the investments class that I teach, actually we do that. We actually go through and show, all right, how you can have, in essence, the cash flow is distributed separately, you know, just off operating income, and have another partner that just wants reversion.
Yeah, because they can take a lot off the cash flow and a little off the reversion,
Right,
and you can walk away because of the negative cash flow.
right,
You know, because it's not attractive to you.
right.
But if you isolate it, you can actually identify that it's actually a profitable
Yeah,
venture.
but here's the thing you have to understand about all of this. All of this is negotiable. This is whatever the two parties can agree on. Okay? Realizing that in most instances, the person with the money almost always has the upper hand. Okay? It's kind of like, you know, with the casino, it's like the house always wins. Okay? Same concept. Okay.
So wait,
Yep.
No, I didn't say
You said
okay,
it,
so
Kate.
when they're getting their residual of 47,778, where's the first 50,000 they didn't have to share?
Where's the first what, I'm sorry?
Okay, the lender's getting after.
The process of which.
There's what parties?
After their members. 50 of NOI, right? Yes, they're getting a cut.
Yeah, at the end of year 5, whenever the property sells, they get 10% of the sale price.
No.
Yeah, that was from the past.
At the end, okay,
Okay, number one, are we talking about the lender or are we talking about the borrower?
we're talking about the borrower,
Okay.
borrower,
Okay,
all right? Their NOI is 150.
yes,
That first 50 that they don't have to share with the lender,
right.
where is that in the residual?
Well, okay, because, all right, up here, NOI, subtract out the 50 that they don't have to share.
Right,
So the 100 is what they do have to share,
right.
but of the 100, only 25% is what they share, so that's the 25.
But where's that 50 in your timeline that's up
It's automatically taken into account up here, because all that really is being subtracted from your before-tax cash flow is the participation piece, the 25,000. So that's why you end up with 47,000.
it was an agreement that he set out on the top initially.
No, I know, but I just don't see it
It's a phantom 50, because it's not,
it's not,
it's what the calculation was based on. It's not like you're losing 50,000, it's just simply that's what the calculation was based on.
no, I know you got the 50. I get it.
All right, let's move forward. Something maybe a little bit more complicated. All right,
When's it rated?
Lease, ground leases are complicated.
all right, wraparound loans. Okay. Wraparound loans or wrap loans are in essence an opportunity for a lender to, in essence, take possession of an existing loan that may be a really good loan because maybe it has a low interest rate or some other sort of characteristic associated with it, and then provide additional financing above and beyond that original loan. And the reason it's called a wrap loan is because it's kind of like a burrito, okay, in the sense that the original loan is in essence the contents of the burrito, and then the wrap loan is what wraps around the contents or the original loan. Okay, does that make sense conceptually? Yes?
Burrito and burrito filling, makes sense.
The burrito filling is the original loan.
Got that.
Okay? And the wrap loan is what's on top of that.
Gotcha.
Okay? Now,
Follow.
so, food analogies I guess always work out. All right. So, in this case, let's say that we have an existing loan. Give me some characteristics. All right, so 12 payments per year. And our original loan, I don't know, $100,000. What the heck? And maybe it has a, give me a term, 30 years. And give me an interest rate.
3.62.
What? 3.62?
You heard him.
3.62. Killing me. All right.
That's the exact interest rate on the one that I'm working on right now.
Okay, all right. And let's get our payment. All right, so our payment, $455.77 rounded. Okay. All right, now, let's say, for simplicity's sake, 5 years have passed since that original loan was made, okay? Purchaser comes along and they want to get a wrap loan on this particular property. And so let's say maybe the property's value has gone up, but the seller of this property in essence is willing to allow them to assume this loan. Okay, it's an assumable loan. Now in many cases, a lot of the assumable loans may be like VA loans. You may have like a Veterans Administration loan, and those in many cases are assumable loans, typically with low interest rates. And so there is some value there to potentially take advantage of. All right? But let's say that 5 years have gone past, and so now we can get a wrap loan. But to keep things simple, I'm going to keep the maturity at 25 years. So that if 5 years have passed, this really has 25 years remaining. Okay? So we make kind of an apples to apples comparison. All right? Now we would sort of say that the interest rate, more than likely, on the wrap loan is going to be higher, okay, than this original loan. Okay, do you have a number you want to throw out on that one, or
4%.
how much?
8%.
8%.
I mean, because on owner financing, you're doing a big service to people because they can't get financing.
Okay, so 8% is going to be the value of, in essence, the wrap loan. Now, in this particular case, we say that the original loan was $100,000. Obviously, 5 years have been paid off and so forth, so on. But let's just sort of say that the property value has also gone up during this time period, and that maybe the property's value is now, or the loan amount that we're willing to and able to get is maybe $125,000.
You wouldn't take the balance remaining?
Well, we're going to deal with that in a minute, okay? So, sort of first things first, I want to do this, okay? So, let's just keep sliding.
That's just the property value at its, on its
Well,
own.
we're saying that this is going to be the value of the new loan, okay? I'm trying to keep it simple, I really am. All right. So our payment for this new loan,
If your term doesn't match up like that, does that mean,
it complicates things dramatically.
but does that,
We can do it, but that's going to require about 45 minutes of explanation.
but just like theoretically,
Don't do it.
Yes.
You have to have because the one I'm working on is a 40-year loan, and it's like, and it just makes things confusing, like
Yes, it does.
conceptually for me, so
I'd be more than happy to give you a spreadsheet that will allow you to do it.
okay, deal.
Okay. All right.
$967.77.
You mean 964, 77.
Sorry, yeah, you're wrong.
And trust no one. Okay.
Trust but verify.
964.77 would be the rate on the new one. Okay. Now, in this case, let's see. Anything else I want to throw in there? All right.
What is the point of this?
That's what I'm thinking.
I don't know.
Okay. So in this case, if we want to set the scenario up of how much, in essence, will the wrap lender make as a rate of return on this deal? Okay, we're looking at it from the lender's perspective. So how much will the lender making this loan, the wrap lender,
Because the way he's
because here's what's happening. Here's what's happening. This is the original, okay? It is the innards of the burrito, okay? The burrito is this loan
The tortilla.
that, in essence,
Yeah.
the tortilla, okay, is this loan. So that what is happening is the wrap lender is basically giving you some more money to buy the property with, okay, or to pay because what's happening over here is chances are what's really happening is that the original seller is selling the property for whatever, in essence, the loan balance is at this particular point in time, 5 years later, and then they're getting, in essence, $25,000+ extra money on top of that, okay? That's what the original seller, keep in mind this is like a three-party deal. You've got the original owner or seller of the property, you have the original lender, which is this, and now you have the wrap lender, but then you also are going to have the new borrower, so really 4 people in the deal, okay? So, the wrap lender is going to, in essence, be making the payments on this loan, okay, making sure that it gets paid, then they are going to get to keep, in essence, the rest, okay? Does that make sense, conceptually? So the borrower, the new borrower, is making payments to the wrap lender of $964.77 out of the money that new borrower is paying. Then the wrap lender cuts a check for the $455. The reason why that is happening is because the wrap lender doesn't trust the new borrower to make those payments. They want to make sure those payments get made. Thus is the reason why they're willing to, in essence, wrap around that original loan. But the reason the lender, the wrap lender, wants to wrap around it is because they know they can make some serious coin off of this deal because the interest rate that they're charging is substantially higher than the interest rate on the original loan. Okay, now.
Why doesn't the person just refinance the property and pay that off and just stick with that?
because it's like it's
Because the refinancing rate, chances are, is probably going to be somewhat equivalent to whatever the wrap lender is providing. So therefore, there's not going to be necessarily a motivation to do so. Or it could also be the case that, once again, it's owner financing, and that tends to complicate things up because it's either below market or above market, or you've got some other intangibles that are sort of embedded within that.
Isn't the seller trying to get out of there?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not-
Oh, the seller is looking at it, they know there is some value in this low interest rate loan that they possess. And so the part of the value that they are recognizing is that below market nature of this, that they are then willing to maybe sell the property for a little bit less or a little bit more, depending on kind of how they're sort of thinking about it, to capitalize on the value for that below market piece, okay? But none of this is what I'm asking you. What I'm asking you is, from the wrap lender's perspective, what is their rate of return? How much money are they making on this deal? Okay? Yep.
Just a quick question. I just don't. I mean, why don't you just refinance? What's the point? Is what I asked.
It's a new borrower.
Right.
Yeah, but
Maybe they
It's a,
can't.
it's
a
a,
new
it's a
guy,
vehicle
yeah.
to sell it, but like if you were to come into a property and try and wholesale it and you couldn't buy it low enough and they're willing to walk away and accept like say $5 grand of equity, and you can come in, take it subject to, and then sell it to a C buyer, on order financing terms.
You could just refinance though.
But they're trying to get out of the property, but they have such little equity. You know what I'm saying?
There's a situation for everything. There's a simple answer to this. And you know, because the circumstances may just simply be that, okay, first of all,
Can you do a
this
situation?
person, okay,
I know. Can we, real life.
okay, this person who owns the property, let's say it's a Veterans Administration loan. They own the property, they want to sell the property. Okay? And they want to sell the property, and in the event that they want to sell the property, they're saying, hey, I've got a Veterans Administration loan, it's at this really super low interest rate relative to what is out there in the market today. Okay? So, they're telling a prospective buyer they're willing to allow them to assume that loan. Okay? So the new borrower or the new purchaser
Okay, got it.
walks down the street, finds a new lender because they can't pay cash for it.
I got it.
All right. And so they find that new lender, and the new lender says, hey, I'm going to make you this loan for $125,000 and basically allow this guy to, in essence, get some money off of this basically new portion. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's the only part I know.
Okay. All right. So how does the wrap lender make money?
Yeah.
All right. So in this case, if we were to go ahead and calculate kind of the difference here, in essence, what's really happening,
509.
we need to find the difference between 964.77 and 455.77. $509 even. Okay? Now, in this case, that 509 represents the difference in the payment. I'm just going to try to do it here. All right. So clear everything out. 509 is the payment. Okay? The term is for 25 remaining years. Okay? The difference in the two loans is $25,000. Now we've got to make one of these basically a negative, you know, one of them a positive in order for everything to kind of work out. So let's make this one a negative as our present value. And then the answer that we're searching for is basically how much rate of return is the wrap lender making on this deal.
6. 4%.
Basically, the borrower still gets a nice 3.62% on the first 100,000.
Is this still 12 payments per year?
You still have your calculator set at 1 hand per year?
No.
Yes, I am. Does it need to be in 12?
Yes.
Look at the top left.
So,
Ah, I got it now.
My brain.
do we want to be a wrap lender?
Yes.
Yes.
And you can also like make money on the down payment and the reversion.
Yes.
So like you get like
That just
3.
complicates things a little bit more, but yes, we can do that. Absolutely. Okay? All right, are we good?
Break.
Is it?
Quick break.
Yeah, sure.
How many, we have 3
Oh,
questions
that's not.
left?
We're going to still have 3 questions. Okay, we'll take a quick break, 5-minute break.
Can you scroll to the second problem that we did?
In from the top, please.
Yeah. He said, "I'm great." I'm like starting.
No, like it's like
Is the place downstairs?
Yeah, it's closed.
that's way too.
Te quería hacer una pregunta.
That's from last week. The one that we did where we had 3 10-year periods,
Yep.
and then we sold it for that. Scroll down to the, yeah.
Well, it's a, I can't really tell you any more than it's, yes.
Can you slow down a little bit more? Yes. Do you have like a spreadsheet for all these questions? Did you have a spreadsheet available for wraparound mortgages?
Yeah, there's one that I've got that I can provide.
That's the most exciting thing that I've learned this year probably, is about wraparounds. The deal is, still confusing though. I'm still trying to piece it together. I sat with an attorney yesterday about purchasing it as a trust.
One of my properties.
Now I'm trying to
It's in Tampa.
find buyers
It's like,
for it.
it's,
But it's a
270.
40-year loan with 37
and
left.
I owe 120 on it.
For the remaining balance is like 111.
So I'm having a
He wants
company-
15 to walk away, and the property is worth 140.
It's
They're trying to sell it
that comes in.
on owner financing at
It's a
140
contractor that comes in and fixes the house.
with
It's, you know,
like 15%.
very nice. They dispute
Like a little arbitrage.
rehab the house because it needs a new kitchen and it's new bathrooms. They come in, they fix the house for you, and they do all the work for free. And then when you sell the
It makes
house,
single-family
that's when they
rentals
get paid.
appealing finally.
So take a cut of the sales price.
They take a cut off the sales price.
So you got the math for that.
So I don't have to say, huh?
You have the math for that.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
What's the cut?
Well, here's, they're gonna get, the rehab's gonna cost $35,000.
So did
So
you
they're
figure out
putting in a
what
new kitchen, a whole new
What?
kitchen, 2 new bathrooms,
that?
and a little bit of painting.
Need to ask him, dude.
He is.
What?
She wants to know like which questions which,
They're competitive with companies that you know.
like the name, like from the sheet that you gave us.
They're competitive. with those.
Did you run out of order a little bit?
Somebody
On purpose.
pay out of their pocket rather than me paying out of my pocket. I'll take the money out of it, so.
Are you taking the law tax back?
Yeah.
Take the law
My
tax.
number's a little off.
But not by much, I'm up by like $5, like actually.
Yeah,
Five.
well,
Yeah.
they, this company worked with my wife's.
She's changed the assumption.
So, through Kai's, and So
Yes,
size is not gonna be talking about them if they're not legitimate.
Oh, really?
How long will they probably
Do the whole thing?
I think
The
they're
whole week?
affiliated,
Can you
yeah,
go
they're
back to the end
affiliated,
of
yeah.
the-
They surely are. Once you be the first one to be using
Is
them.
there a
then
finish?
they just
It's
started.
so time consuming.
Yeah, bro, you're fine.
Mostly.
I didn't do the whole thing.
I have like a show.
The only thing I didn't do was the like,
But
I did all the cash flow sheets and everything, but like the
I'm pretty much
development sheets, it was like,
That one was tough. That's the hardest time.
really?
Yeah.
That sounds good, yeah.
I don't have to pay capital gains because I'm not.
Everything else is
into
easy.
another-
Stabilization is easy.
I did
So I gotta pay
construction.
some
I
25,000.
It doesn't take the development one takes a while?
You know,
A couple hours?
My wife's gonna.
This is
be
tedious.
an affiliate
Maybe it's
of the property.
the way he decided to distribute.
Realist.
No, I'm not around that. I'm like on the last couple.
Yeah.
You know how usually realtors get 6%?
Those fly by you.
I put Miss Maisel on.
I just want to talk to that.
Whoever sells it.
Next thing you
is
know,
right
like
when
4
you get
hours.
that long ass fucking percent.
I'm just not gonna answer it. I swear, like, I'm good.
Frank the
Like,
client.
I just calculated my grade, like, I'm just gonna get like a 50 on this and I'll
I
be
think I'm
fine.
no, it's before that.
It's still good. I get like a 40 or 50 and I'll still have like an 85. So.
But in those times, it was like super taboo.
Oh, from other companies?
For a woman
Yeah, that's not right. They're the only ones who do it like that.
to and it's fun.
They're the only one I know that does it like that.
Last week I didn't do that deal. They're 75.
How do you get an 80 or better?
What do you do?
There's,
So what, so you
you
don't
can
What do I
look
do?
at it's spelled
What don't I
C.
do?
don't want
So-
You want like at least to be.
I work for a very big
They can look them up
firm.
online, they seem to.
Yeah.
Their general
You
contractor.
gotta get
Three
all
points.
that stated.
Plus your 3 points.
Yeah, but
So we
oh
make-
yeah, there's an
we
extra
do,
3 points though.
investments and we do,
Sales.
Actually, we found
agents
it.
to use
projects.
their clients.
Minimum
I saw
project
it.
size for us is probably like 50.
Nice.
So-
Oh, you mean price?
I'm gonna do all the other ones and then like maybe mess around.
Yeah.
So you know me, I try to get out of here
I-
as fast as possible.
Like me?
I don't even double check, bro.
You know,
Oh,
I actually did that
double check
myself.
That's why. That's the only reason. Like for half of the test, I missed one question. It's because of like some stupid miscalculation. But I'm like, whatever.
Bro, this shit is so good.
That's why I never want to take advantage
Well,
of it.
I'm gonna do too much work. Like all those deals that we can't buy because
Putting down tiles
or
and
list
windows.
that don't wanna list. I mean, but we can't wholesale or
I wouldn't do it personally.
list.
I've done it personally.
Either one is amazing. This is how you build wealth.
Yeah. Well, I don't have that. It's too
Like a lot of. I kinda got to make money on the reversion at the end.
Yeah, you're shipping it. Like I feel like it's hard.
Okay, wait, I'm listening to
I feel like it's hard to make it work.
So we invest.
They actually went to the house Curbio, and I have one of those.
They can't tell you that.
We make the.
anybody background or just like you have down?
No, I want, I'm not.
They had somebody in
I don't have
there
that.
station in Tampa Bay.
Say,
Wait for hand, I'll go.
That's my last.
Did you get all that? The rap one?
Okay, buy down loan.
It's like.
Basically,
Not like a.
how developers manipulate the price point of new products that they're selling. Okay? So, let's assume that you're building a new condo project or new housing development or it could be, you know, even, well, let's go with those because those are going to be the most common where this is going to be used. All right, so one of the challenging things that you face as a developer is where do you start with the price point on the property? In other words, you bought the land, you build the building, or you build the buildings, and what do you price it at? Okay? And because what your initial price is, to a certain extent, sets the market for everything to come later. Yes? Yes. Okay. So, just from a very simple perspective, you want to set the price point as high as you possibly can coming out of the gate, because you want the subsequent values of the properties to be as high as possible. In other words, you don't want, what the mistake that some developers make is they try to offer too many discounts up front, and then, to get people to buy into the property. But then what happens is, then those discounts, if it's not going to be an overly hugely sought after project, then those will set kind of a threshold for the valuation of the property from that point forward. Does that make sense? In other words, think of it like this. I've come in, I bought, and I built, and whatever, my cost as the developer is maybe $75,000, okay, all in per unit is $75,000. And I obviously want to get some profit out of whatever I sell it for. So, in a perfect world, I would want to get something maybe north of, $100,000 a unit, okay? But if I say, I really want to, sell the first few units at cost to try to get some people buying them, then what happens is, then whenever an appraisal comes in subsequent to that, the appraiser is saying, well, these first two properties sold at $75,000, that's the price point, therefore, that's the value of the property. Does that make sense? Okay, so what the developer typically would prefer to do is not adjust the price point, but adjust the financing of the deal so that they can basically sell you a property at a higher price but give you lower financing costs. In essence, the trade-off is the value of that below market financing. Does that make sense? Okay, so how can they achieve that? So the light's starting to come on, I can see it. Okay, so the idea is you are buying down the interest rate as the developer, okay? So let's just say, here is the deal that we've sort of got. Once again, we'll just say we've got $100,000 is the loan amount. Once again, 12 payments per year. And the term is, let's say, for 30 years. And the interest rate is, let's say, 10%. Okay, so we calculate our payment. We get $877.57, okay, as our monthly payment. Okay, everybody good so far? All right, so what we want to do is we want to buy down the interest rate for the borrower, and what we want to buy it down to is maybe 5%. Okay, so let's just do so the monthly payment on that is going to be $536.82. Now, here's the thing. We don't want to buy it down as a developer for, forever. We only want to buy it down for maybe like a period of a few years, okay? Probably at the most like 5 years, all right? But let's just say that we want to buy it down for 2 years. What the heck? All right, so the first thing we're going to do is just figure out what the differences in the payments are going to be. Okay, difference of $340.75 a month. Okay, so let's just try to see what's happening here. All right, I'm the developer, and I am saying I want to try to keep my price point as high as possible. So to a certain extent, what I'm kind of doing with the purchasers is I'm saying, all right, look, if you pay me $100,000 for, or we get a loan for $100,000, the current interest rates are 10%, and your monthly payment is going to be this, but because you're one of my first purchasers, I'm going to offer you a deal of where I'm going to buy down your interest rate from 10% down to 5%, meaning your monthly payment for the next however long a period I want to do this giveaway will be $536 a month, or a difference of $340 a month. Okay, significant. Yes? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, part of what I am trying to achieve as a developer is to keep my price point high. Because if you sort of, I don't know if I do this, it's going to make it more complicated. All right, suffice it to say this. If I can kind of say to the prospective buyer, you're getting this lower monthly payment, to them that should imply a significant amount of reduction in value. Like just on a very basic level, let me do it on a very basic level. Let's say that I'm able to convince the buyer they're going to save this for 24 months or 2 years. Okay? Okay? So in essence, what I'm trying to sell to the buyer is, you do this wonderful deal with me, and over the first couple of years, I'm going to save you $8,000 in payments. Okay? So therefore, in the minds of many of those home purchasers or buyers or whatever, they should be willing, in one sense, to pay $8,000 more for the property up front because they're getting $8,000 worth of savings. If we just do it just a pure, dollar for dollar, whatever, okay? Does that make sense conceptually? But now what I've got to do, because keep in mind, all of this is being done for one very simple reason. I'm trying to maintain as high of an initial price point as possible for the units that I'm selling. I'm not going to give every single person that buys a unit from me this deal. I'm only going to give the first few because that's what subsequent appraisals are going to be based off of. Does that make sense? Now, a really good appraiser will see through all of the smoke and mirrors, and so all of my work here has been lost, okay, in one sense. But many appraisers are not so great. They just simply pull comps and say, it sold for $100,000, it sold for $100,000, it sold for $100,000, not realizing that there was a special financing package that was offered. Does that make sense? Yes or no? Okay.
How do you advertise that as a developer?
You just simply say we're offering a
So they're not hiding.
we're offering you an initial lower payment for the first 2 years of your loan. We're cutting your payment not quite in half, but we're cutting it down substantially. Yeah.
This is basically the pre-development phase where you're selling some of the units up front.
It's pre-construction.
It can be pre-development, but it can also be, it's open and available for sale. But you just want to set the initial price point as high as possible. I don't know how else to really explain it, but it's just like if you've got merchandise, the last thing that you want to do, if everybody's going to be looking at what what it sold for previously, you don't want to set the price point low. I mean, the initial gut reaction of most people is to say, oh, I'm going to give away the first few things, or give it away at maybe a super discount price, and then everybody's going to come in and they're all going to want it. Sometimes real estate works that way, sometimes it doesn't, okay? But the problem that you have whenever you do that deep discount on the front end is that the value by the appraisers is going to be based on what that giveaway was.
Yeah, well,
And you've gotta avoid that.
I've always been baffled by that because in New York they do that with tax abatements.
Right.
They'll give you the tax abatement for X amount of years, but you pay the market price. I'm like, how do you see the value? Like, I don't see the discount.
Well, this is strictly a way to maintain the price point. That's all this is trying to do. Okay? I'm trying to cut through all the smoke and mirrors. It is the developer's way of maintaining the price point.
And setting the market.
Setting the market.
Are they having them get the loan and then they're paying the difference?
Well, okay, here's the thing. In many of these sort of development kind of projects, you have a quote-unquote preferred lender that you are working with that in essence is making these loans for the units.
Okay.
And so that preferred lender that you're sort of working with is going to, in essence, work out, this deal with you. Now, we still haven't got to the point, of how this, or what I'm really asking for. Here's what, in essence, I'm asking for is, all right, how much, because the lender is basically, they want to get paid this, but the developer is allowing them to only get paid this, so the developer is going to make up the difference, in essence. And so what we have just done is we have said, okay, that difference is $340.75 a month. And in this case, if the lender wants to maintain their 10% yield, and the term on this is for 24 months, how much would we, as the developer, have to come out of pocket at time period 0 to prepay this to the lender? Is what I'm asking. Okay?
Is that 340? Yeah.
So $7,384.34 would be paid by developer to lender at beginning of loan. On behalf of borrower. Okay, does that make sense?
Well, can you, like, if you're a smart buyer, you can go in and request that?
Sure.
What is that called?
I just want to have my interest rate locked down.
I want to go in, I want a deal.
Yeah, basically.
You want to buy down the interest rate?
I want you to buy down my interest rate.
So how would you just pay like a fee to get it down?
The developer would pay that amount to, here's the thing, okay, the lender is getting paid the same amount regardless. The lender is not giving up anything, okay? They're getting paid their equivalent of $877.57 a month, okay? What is happening is, assuming that you're the lender, you're still getting paid whatever you're getting paid. I'm the developer. I'm basically saying, all right, I'm going to make you whole at the $877.57 a month, so I am going to buy down this interest rate on behalf of my purchasers or your borrowers, and I'm in essence going to write you a check up front for $73.84.34, which is then going to allow you to basically take that money, sock it away, and the borrower is only going to have to pay the $536.82 for the first 2 years, and then after that, they're going to be making the full payment of the $877 to you as the lender. It's just like, I'm just getting involved in the middle of all of this as a developer because I'm trying to maintain a price point. I'm trying to figure out a way to maintain the price point of the property by offering something else in return. Another way that developers do this, that try to skirt around the system, And I'm not advocating, I'm just saying, these are ways in which developers, another thing would be to say, okay, for the first 3 people that buy houses or units within my building or subdivision or whatever, I'm gonna fully furnish them. They're gonna have beds, they're gonna have appliances, they're gonna have everything all included, but I'm not really going to kind of, you know, say all of that, you know, really in terms of the documentation.
Seller higher priced. And then,
Because of that,
yeah.
you're accomplishing the same thing. You're getting your price point high for those first 3. Because subsequent purchasers don't know that you did that for those people.
So for this, real quick, for an example, if like a developer was developing like single family homes, was developing in like 50 of them. All right, the first 3 that sell, we're going to be doing this type of finance option. So that
And we're
comps
going to give
go
them free
up,
furniture.
so that the comps go up. And
Right.
then, like,
That's exactly. You're maintaining or setting the price
But it
point.
would make no sense to do this on just like one building though.
Yes, it would. If
You're
you're
50
developing
units,
one
bro.
building.
developing one building that's got 100 units in it.
Well, I'm just saying like if it was like a rental, like you were owning.
Oh yeah,
the
if it's
entire-
rental, that's no. But we're talking about individual condominiumized or townhomes
Yeah, it
units.
just makes sense.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
if the developer is trying to do pre-construction sales to get, is this?
This is one of the ways
This is
in
one
which
of the
they
ways.
can incentivize those pre-construction sales.
So the borrower thinks they're getting a unit that's worth $100,000 when it's really only costing the developer $25,000.
Caps, man.
Yeah.
But-
Another thing
but how does it-
another way that developers can try to achieve this is they'll say, we'll give you cash back at closing.
Incentives.
Yeah. They'll say, okay, we're gonna give you $10,000 cash back at closing. So the house that you paid $100,000 for, we're gonna give you $10,000 cash back at closing, because once again, we wanna keep the price point at $100,000.
So is this the lender is the same lender that's giving the construction loan? That's,
Well, no, the lender is
or
usually.
this is another
The
lender
usually,
financing.
usually, on a development like I'm describing, there is a preferred lender that is working with the developer. They have already underwritten, you know, in theory, the whole project, and they're simply saying, we're willing to work with the developer to come up with whatever interesting mechanisms
Gimmick.
that we can come up with to try to incentivize sales
Right.
and to set, you know, the price point wherever.
So that lender who's, they might say, you need to sell so many units at so much before you start construction, and
It can be done
it could
a
be
myriad
done
of different
anyway.
ways,
Right.
okay? It really can. And all I'm trying to illustrate here is this is one of the mechanisms that the developer can use to try to maintain a certain price point. I mean, you know, to put it even in just simpler terms, that, you know, it's sort of like, I can say to you, all right, I'm gonna sell you this property for $200,000, but I'm gonna give you $100,000 back at closing because I want the price point to be set at $200,000. But that one's a bit more obvious because it's such a substantial dollar amount. But if we're working on the margins of, you know, it's a 10% difference or a 20% difference, that matters when we're talking about 100 units. Because if my price point gets set at $100,000 versus $90,000, that 10% difference over 100 units, that's significant. You know, just $10,000 a unit, obviously times 100 of those, you know, $1 million. Yep.
So the way Lennar does it is they offer incentives and they have their own, they own their finance division as well.
Well, there's another way to do
And
it.
they pay their closing costs on the division
Right.
side. So how does their finance division make a profit when they're paying out-of-pocket closing costs for the developer?
They may not.
So they just control the price of their communities, basically?
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. It's kind of a smoke and mirrors thing.
Like what Mans was saying.
And the real quick, how did we get to the 24 period? Was it because we said?
I just said,
that-
we're gonna buy the interest rate for the first 2 years.
I'm sorry?
That's the same thing.
The developer is buying down the interest rate for the first 2 years or 24 months.
Oh,
So
okay,
it's just
okay.
It's a lot of
It's for 2 years, gotcha. Alright.
Okay, moving forward.
Someone else facilitate.
Move on.
Building construction, property management company, operating company.
Okay, let's do the easy one first.
Writing it down.
Okay,
Yeah.
First, middle, and last name.
Is that 3 questions?
so the one on leases, specifically the valuation of a lease fee estate. Okay. So,
What's that say?
Yeah, would it say leased fee?
leased fee, it's a legal concept. Instead of fee
Like fee
simple,
simple?
lease
Okay,
fee,
cool.
okay? All right. So let's say that we've got a property that has been leased for how many years? I mean, in other words, it has a lease remaining for how many years? 25 year remaining. Okay, what is its current lease rate per square foot? I'm not going to tell you what kind of property, it doesn't really matter, okay? What lease rate per square foot per year? Okay, somebody, what?
175?
No, too high.
$90.
90, we can work with 90. Still a little bit high, but 90 bucks per square foot per year. Okay. Definitely a higher end property. All right, 90 bucks per square foot per year on the lease rate. Now, that is the number of years remaining on the lease. Now this lease has maybe been in operation for 5 years, you know, doesn't really matter. But that is what the lease rate is. What if the current, for that same property, same type of property, the current prevailing rate is something dramatically higher or dramatically lower? Okay, you want it to be, which one do you want it to be? The current market rate.
We want it to be,
No, I'm not saying what you want it to be, I'm saying for the purpose of the problem.
oh, I thought this was like a theoretical question.
So, in terms of the current market rate, okay, 110. All right, so the difference between the two is 20 bucks, right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how big of a property? Let's just say 10,000 square feet. Okay, 10,000 square feet. Or 200,000 of basically lease payments per year. Okay? We good?
That's it?
No. No, are we good up to this point? Yes? Okay, now. What is, if you were to, you can look at this a variety of different ways. You can look at it, all right, if I'm the tenant of this space and I have the ability to basically sublease the space, I could sublease the space to another tenant, move out of the space myself, move another tenant in, and sublease it to the new tenant for 110 bucks a square foot, making 20 bucks a square foot. Or from the owner's perspective, by this tenant staying in the property, I am in essence losing $20 a square foot per year. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm just trying to set this up conceptually.
Yes.
All right, so let's say that we look at it from the tenant's perspective. What is the value of this leasehold estate? In other words, it's $20 per square foot, or $200,000 a year as a payment for how many years remaining on the lease?
25.
25. And assuming, let's say, a 5% discount rate,
12 payments per year.
this is going to be one payment per year because it's, once again, per square foot per year. Okay? So the leasehold value $2,818,788.91. So what are we saying here? We're saying, if it's from the tenant's perspective, in essence, they theoretically could vacate the space if they wanted to, sublease to somebody else, and pretty much walk away with $200,000 in their pocket each year, or in a discounted value basis, $2.8 million worth of value that they could, in essence, capture. Okay?
But you don't understand a 30-year lease.
Sure you do.
Yeah.
CVS and Walgreens do it all the time.
Isn't this, I'm assuming, I don't know.
Also, government leases.
Wouldn't this be like the arbitrage that we works has been doing?
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't this be the arbitrage that we works has been doing?
To a certain extent, it could be, yeah.
Yeah.
If they know what they're doing, which they don't. So, all right. So basically what we're saying is, from the tenant's perspective, this would be the present value of their leasehold interest in the property, in the sense that they would be able to sublease the property out, make a nice little tidy profit of $200,000 a year, and walk away. Now, also, now from the owner's perspective, this is what they're sort of giving up in the sense of the value of that. Okay? So it's just kind of like whichever perspective you want to look at. Now, here's the thing. This all assumes you can sublease. Many leases will preclude you from being able to sublease. But my point with this, there is clearly a value in having a commercial lease that says we can sublease. Okay? Or precluding subleasing. That's what I'm saying. You know, it depends on whose perspective you're looking at it from. If you're looking at it from the tenant's perspective, you want to be able to sublease. If you're looking at it from the owner's perspective, we don't want you to sublease. You follow? That's the simple lesson. Because of this kind of, in one sense, arbitrage opportunity that may present itself by virtue of market changes. Okay? Make sense?
Are rent increases like regulated for commercial property?
Not regulate. Are you saying like governmental regulation?
Yeah,
No.
not residential.
Not on commercial properties.
So I can raise it to $2 million a month if I wanted to.
Well, but the market has to bear it. In other words, just because you raise it to that point doesn't mean anyone's going to pay it.
But I could
See,
raise
this is different than on like residential properties. You have the government that has intervened in certain markets like New York, you know, with their rent controls, you know, for like apartments and things like that, you know, and you know, try to lock in a price for a period of time. A horrible thing for landlords, you know, good thing for, you know, a long-term tenant, but a horrible thing for landlords. Okay, all right.
If that's rent, then why are you doing it on with an interest rate?
You're just looking at a discounted value, is all we're doing. We're just trying to say what would be, in other words, the cash price up front for that difference.
For the tenant to make 5%?
Yeah.
Yeah?
In essence. I mean, you can, yeah, sure, you could just simply say $200,000 times 25 and get a lump sum amount, but no one's gonna pay you for that. What we're saying is this might be a way to be able to get paid sort of up front.
Just seeking a 5% return.
Right. Okay. All right, moving forward. Last problem. All right.
Breakdowns?
Start new journey.
Okay, so one of the things that we want to do is to sometimes parse out, from a valuation perspective on a property, how much are we attributing to the mortgage value of the property, how much are we attributing to the equity value of the property, all right? And because over time, it changes based upon maybe the performance of the property, okay? And we want to kind of figure out that obviously up front, when we buy a property or we develop a property, we know, okay, we spent this much for the land, we spent this much for the improvements, you know, that makes sense. But what we really sometimes want to know is, all right, how much is the property worth based upon the mortgage that we obtained and based upon the revenue that it's sort of generating and being able to come up with that sort of capitalized value. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through this whole process and do a handful of little calculations. So in this case, the simple thing is the value, in this case, the price is going to be equal to the mortgage value plus the equity value, okay? So that's a simple sort of formula. Now, in this particular case, that present value or that price, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to know a few things, all right? So let's assume that we've got a net operating income, and let's say we make the net operating income $50,000, all right? And in this case, we have a debt service coverage ratio of 1.2, all right? Then what that's going to mean is that our annual debt service is going to be equal to what? As you remember, debt coverage ratio is equal to net operating income divided by annual debt service. So if we're giving you those two, you can solve for the third. All right, so in this case, $50,000 divided by 1.2 is going to give us annual debt service of $41,666.67. Okay, so that's the first little piece. All right, so assume that we get a loan, in this case, with a 20-year term, with monthly payments, okay, and in this case, we're going to make the assumption of an interest rate of 11%. All right? So what we want to do is we want to figure out, in essence, first of all, what the monthly payments are going to be on this. All right, so to do that, we're going to take the 41,666.67 divide by 12 to get our monthly payments, which will be 34,72.22. Okay. All right. So if we go over here, and we put in 34,72.22 as our monthly payment for 20 years at 11% interest rate, then we're going to calculate the value of our mortgage at $336,394.01 or 02. Okay, so that really becomes this piece of the equation. $336,394.02. So now what we have to do is to figure out the equity value. Okay. Okay, so that's the mortgage value. Now let's look at on the equity side of things. All right, so in this case, what we have are cash flows from the property on a before-tax basis of the following. So you're 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So 8,033.33. 98.33, 11,378, 12,969.
What are these values again?
Cash flows, before tax cash flows. This is the amount of money that you would walk away with as the investor. Okay? 14,608. All right? And then we're assuming that in the resale at the end of year 5 is going to net us a cash flow after paying off the mortgage of $221,450, and then we're going to apply a 12% discount rate, and then from that we are going to solve for net present value. Okay?
What is number 4?
I'm sorry?
What is year number 4?
This is a cash, before tax cash flow.
No,
plus
right above it,
your
right above
reversion.
it. Year number 4, 12,969. 69.
Are
Might as well
are
say.
you giving us those cash flows, or are we?
I am. I am so generous.
And the reversion as well?
Yes. Okay. All right, so these are, once again, 1 payment per year. Okay, so 0 is going to be your first cash flow. Next cash flow. Cash flow, then something. Okay? Okay, we end up with 165, 565, 30. Okay, so it becomes the value of your equity. Okay, so we go back up here. We simply add that, 165, 565, 30 to our mortgage value. Or an overall value for the property of $501,959.32. Okay, so what you're doing, very, very simply, is you are trying to partition out the value associated with the mortgage and then what is remaining on the equity side based strictly on the cash flows that have been generated on that investment, with an expectation that you want a 12% rate of return on that property. So in other words, here's another way to look at it. Here are the cash flows I have received or am anticipating receiving for this property for this 5-year period. And this is once again my reversion. And then if I wanted or I demanded a 12% rate of return, that would be the value of my equity piece. I add the equity piece to my debt piece, then that gives me the overall value of the property of the $501,000. Okay? Make sense?
Going back to the debt piece.
Yep.
Can you scroll up to the portion where you did 41,666 divided by 12? So like, I guess can you explain that? I don't know. I must have.
Well, okay. This is your annual debt service.
So first you gave us NOI and you gave us debt coverage ratio, and then we back solved for annual debt service of 41,666. Okay. Then we just wanted to find out what the monthly payment was, and then just got it.
And then based on that monthly payment, with a 20-year term and 11% interest rate, and you're saying the value of that debt was $336,000.
No,
okay?
Thank you.
James?
On the cash flows, could you scroll to the cash flows? There's a, is that 12% or should that be 11%?
Yes, it is 12%.
Where's 12% came from?
I gave it to you.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Scroll back.
So
once
Present value, right?
Yep.
Look
Okay. Here is Quizzy 8.
This isn't.
Can we shake it off of?
Yeah.
So this is the final of all of the combined, correct? And you're scaring me. That would suck. It was the test of the conveyance and so forth.
You ready?
You got this. You got this. Don't forget, guys, quarter deck after some of guys' class today. Yeah, food, drinks, fun times, good company. Something like that. No, I don't promise. Promise of the food and drinks, so if you're there, it's not good. I don't have my quick paper.
Well, it's beginning like.
Why not? I'm just saying it's a problem.
You know, that's something a personal problem.
It is. That's why I'm letting you know. You're the keeper of the papers.
Let me give you.